All right, cool. I don't know if anyone's going to introduce us or whether we'll do that ourselves.
Yeah, I think I'll just introduce you as the main host, and you can take it from there doing the introductions, just so not repetitive. But if everything is all good, we'll kick it off.
But you got to enable screen sharing for me, okay?
Very true. Here, let me do that right now.
Cool.
I'll just do it in the main session.
All right, sounds good. All right.
Yeah, perfect. All right, here we go. All right, everybody. So like I was saying before, let's kick it off here. Bring the panelists to the main session. It should be letting them in right now. There we go. So real quick, as I give Mike Grandinetti the ability to share his screen.
Yeah, and unmute, guys, unmute.
There you go. All right, so everybody, as I was saying before, it's going to be a very exciting chat today. We have Mike Grandinetti here and 4 other amazing panelists going to speak about ESG and DEI. So I'll let Mike take it away.
Beautiful. All right. Well, listen, first of all, thank you so much, Josh, for getting us started. And I want to welcome everyone to day 2 of the annual Decode conference. And I'm really excited about kicking off day 2 with what I believe to be just an incredibly important topic of discussion. And we are going to talk about, and this is an ideally suited discussion for the very socially and environmentally conscious Berkeley and Stanford students that are with us today. But we're going to talk in great detail, right? We're going to do a deep dive here on the relevance of corporate social responsibility, focus on environment, social and governance, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what their relative worth, what their relative impact is, in a very, very challenging economic environment. And we have 5 really talented and expert speakers that are going to join us. Alex Friedman is the founder and chief executive of Novata. Novata is an ESG reporting and analytics platform. And one of the insights of Alex and his co-founders is that the vast majority of economic output does not come from public companies, but from private companies. And so Alex is focused on that very significant part of the economy. In the year since Novata launched, they have added over 1,000 customers, enterprises to their very rapidly growing customer list. And Alex will tell us about the very prestigious award that Novata was just granted, and I believe in the last week. Okay, so they're really very, very rapidly getting an incredible level of attention and traction in the market. Allie is currently the Chief Executive Officer of ETTA, and this is a fashion tech startup with a strong focus on data. Prior to that, Allie was actually working for Accenture as a DEI and CSR futurist. And prior to that, she was working as a journalist. Carmen also spent her early career as a journalist, and she is now leading a fashion tech company focused on the circular economy out of Europe, and is working out of the PwC Accelerator in Europe for female founders. Dr. Gunnar Hauptmann is the Executive VP and the Head of Program at the very prestigious and extremely interesting St. Gallen Symposium. And Sharon Darby has spent the last 23 years of her career with one of the hidden gems in the US economy, a company known as Cascade Engineering, that was literally one of the very first certified B corporations in the world. And so each of them, I think, brings a very unique perspective to our discussion today. I am a former McKinsey consultant, an 8-time co-founder of tech startups, and I now teach at Harvard, Brown, and I teach in the Berkeley Executive Ed program out of their engineering school. And I'm on the board of Decode. Okay, so with that, let's just spend a couple of minutes setting the stage. So Milton Friedman, who was both a Nobel Prize winning economist and was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, had a profound influence over economic policy and how businesses conducted themselves over literally a half a century. And if we were to summarize Mr. Friedman's philosophy in one quote, the business of business is business. The shareholder was absolutely the central focal point of the business, and everything else needed to sort of figure it out on its own. And I think as a result of that, we know where we wound up, and we know some of the incredible crises that we are facing today. And so we saw over time, as people became more concerned about the environment and about social impact and about governance, we saw a lot of performative type, a lot of greenwashing and blue washing. And in the time frame around 2010 or so, a movement was launched out of all places, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And this organization, known as the B Lab, came up with an incredibly rigorous 200 data point criteria set that would allow organizations to be certified as B corporations, and they would meet the highest standards of social and environmental impact. And the certified B corporation took a much more expansive view of the purpose of the corporation or the organization. And it wasn't just the financial world, it was certainly about their employees, their customers, their community, the way they governed the business. And this was a pretty radical idea. And companies that participated early on were truly trailblazers. Okay? Now, it took an awfully long time for the Business Roundtable to pick up on the pioneering work of the B Lab. But in August of 2019, under the leadership of the pretty legendary Wall Street operator, Jamie Dimon, the Business Roundtable issued a renewed purpose of the corporation, which was to a large extent pretty consistent with what we saw that had emerged out of Philadelphia, literally a decade before. Okay. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is that the World Economic Forum, operating out of Europe, right, has, and Europe has always been a more friendly version of capitalism. They'd always had a much more sort of nuanced view of what the purpose of a company was. And there was a lot more focus on the environment long before the US, before that went mainstream. So there was a parallel effort happening in Europe for many years. Okay. And so with that, right, with this evolution of the purpose of the corporation, we arrive today at this increasing focus on ESG and CSR and DEI. And with that, I want to stop my share and I want to turn to Sharon, Darby, who is currently the head of sustainability at Cascade Engineering, and who literally was one of the very, very first organizations in the world to apply to be a certified B corporation. Now, Cascade Engineering is a 50-year-old company. They were founded by Fred Keller. And what's amazing about this company is operating not out of one of the coastal elite, cities, but operating out of the manufacturing world in Michigan. Fred Keller had the vision, along with the team, to apply for this very nascent movement. So Sharon, would you kind of share your experience about what was going on at that time within Cascade and what led the organization to decide that you were going to go through this rigorous assessment so far ahead of the curve?
Well, thanks for the invitation today. So Fred Keller started the company in Grand Rapids, Michigan in 1973. So we're almost 50 years old. We're a manufacturer, plastic injection molding. We're very diversified. We're in the automotive industry, material handling, furniture. We are in polymer compounding and waste and recycling as well. So we do value, obviously, diversifying. So Fred, right from the get-go, from day one, has always been a proponent of doing the right thing. What he says is find something good, like as in people and planet, and then make it good for business. And so that's what his philosophy was. He was thinking outside of the box before it was even called sustainability. And so he educated the workforce. He was also teaching a class at Cornell, and he would bring that material back to Cascade Engineering. And that's where we had our first introduction to it. And so we all took his class, and we all had to write a paper and do a presentation. And so, that was kind of the beginning. And there were some grassroots efforts in there because we had to come up with a project that was a sustainable project that we could incorporate into the company. And so everybody embraced that. We had some really great ideas. We did implement some of the things. So this is something that he very strongly believes in, and has been very innovative when it comes to the company. So when we bring people into the organization, we teach them right from day one what our values are, how they can be involved, what is sustainability. We give them education on that. And we want to be as progressive as we can within our means of resources. So we took the ESG, and we don't call it ESG in our market, if you will. We call it triple bottom line, and more specifically, internally, we call it people, planet, and profit. And so our mission statement is based around people, planet, and profit. Everything we do has those components in it, including our strategic planning, what our 1-year objectives, our 5-year objectives, our goals, our metrics is all based off of that principle. We started doing our TBL reports in 2003 because we wanted a way to capture some of the things that we were doing. And so if you go to our website, you'll see those reports dating all the way back to 2003. And every year we keep adding to that story. And, we didn't start doing everything all at once. We started just picking off a little piece at a time. And we really started out with the social aspect, with the people. Because Fred believed that was our biggest asset. And that was something we really needed to get right. Most people don't start out with that because that is the hardest to do. And so we came up with our culture, which is based around 7 Habits for Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. We educate everybody in that. They go through refresher courses. That's how we want to treat each other. They also get diversity awareness and sustainability. Fred had an idea that he wanted to help those who are on the payroll of the government, welfare, if you will. He wanted to be able to employ those folks. So we had come up with a program called Welfare to Career. And this is something that we didn't get right the first 2 times. The 3rd time around, we finally got it right, but we were able to bring those folks into our company, give them careers, help them to be less dependent on the government. So it was a win-win. And so that really kicked us off in the social arena. Then we went on to anti-racism credentialing. So we were credentialed in anti-racism, and that basically helped us to incorporate all of the DE&I aspects in every part of our business, including policies and procedures, including supply chain, including customers. So everything that we did, we looked at it from that angle. Then we went to Returning Citizens Program, and we wanted to help those who were coming back into the general population and giving them a second chance. And so we have a program now where we're able to employ those folks safely and giving them careers and helping them to return productively. And we're also veteran friendly. We're a woman minority owned business. mouthful. So Fred has now moved to the chairman of the board, and his daughters now run the company. So we're very proud of that. And then we moved on to the planet side. So, we're very good with social, and we thought, you know what, we need to get this right on the environmental side. All of our facilities are ISO 14001 certified. We have been zero waste to landfill since 2012. Now, we started our journey in 2002, okay, but we didn't get to zero waste to landfill in 2012. So, it was a progressive activity where initially we said, we have so much money going, spending in, removing waste from the organization. What can we do to help that? And so we tackled one problem, one issue at a time until we got to the zero waste. And we've been zero waste to landfill now for over 10 years. We have a LEED certified building. So we renovated an existing building, and that was one of the first platinum certified LEED buildings in West Michigan. We're very proud of that. We got a little bit more progressive and opened up our own neighborhood recycling center. And we were able to bring in the local community to help them recycle things that were a little bit more difficult. And we were able to do that at no cost to them and very little cost to us. We developed a cradle to cradle pallet, plastic pallet in 2009. We use recycling materials, PCR, PIR, so post-industrial recycling, post-consumer recycling, and we're able to use that material inside of our product and help to make that a more sustainable cart, if you will. We're also very first to launch a roll to curb cart made from post-consumer curbside materials. And we know how hard it is to recycle curbside plastic. And so that is something that's just recent. But with all the people and the planet initiatives, I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on the profit side, because you have to have the profit in order to do the other two. So that's where we came up with our Cascade enterprise system, where it's based on strategies for growth, continuous improvement. We base it on lean manufacturing principles and eliminating waste throughout the organization. A lot of times we do that through 8-3s or rapid improvement events. And of course, we have our goals and metrics that we challenge ourselves with to try to achieve that. So all of these things might sound daunting and might sound very, there's a lot to it, but we've been doing this from the beginning when Fred started the company, and we are only going at the pace that we can with the resources we have. We don't have a huge department. We have one. That's myself, but I don't do everything. And it is integrated into everybody's job responsibilities. And we use volunteers, people who are passionate about it. So we're able to use that to help the organization. So I'd like to touch a little bit on the B Corp if I can.
Yeah, please. In fact, I was just about to push you in that direction. So that's perfect.
Wonderful. So we initially applied for B Corp in 2010. Fred stumbled across along this B Corp, B Lab process, and he was immediately taken back by how much benefit this could have. So there's a lot of rigorous application, data, questions that need to be answered. It is a little bit of work, but it's very well worth it. It's an independent auditing process. It provides a benchmark. So you are actually compared to other businesses or other organizations that are similar to yours. And it helps give you a little bit of structure and maybe some potential ideas on how you can get better at those certain areas. And so we started in 2010. We've been recertified since then, 2012, 2015, 2017, 2021. So we are continuing this. And Fred was very, very vocal in the beginning on helping to get B Lab off to a good start, because in Michigan, it's illegal to include sustainability into your board governance. So, that's something that we would like to see change. It's not yet, but that didn't stop us from getting certified. So we went through the whole process. It is included, with everything that we do with our articles of incorporation. So we were there, but of course, there's more work to be done. So when we look at our, people, planet, profit, you got a people, a planet, and a profit, and right in the middle is your B certification, your B lab. And so that ties everything together to show that, you are walking the walk.
Yeah. Awesome.
When we first heard that, Patagonia was applying, we thought, oh no, there goes our, largest manufacturer, the largest organization. But, we embraced Patagonia because, they're an awesome company, and we wanted to share all of that with, everybody else too, who's trying to get certified. So we're happy they're in there, but we're happy that we're able to at least blaze the trail, if you will, for other manufacturers, because it's very difficult for manufacturing to be certified. And so that's something we're trying to help, pave the road and get that something that was very doable.
That's great. So Sharon, let me just say a couple things just to kind of reinforce a few points, right? When Yvon Chouinard finally became financially successful, which was never his primary goal, his comments were, people thought I was crazy until I became rich, right? Which was, the idea that you would create a company like Patagonia with the real purpose of using your profits and your insights to have a focus on sustainability was considered radical, right? And so very much the same, I'm sure, for Fred Keller, operating out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, right? There had to be a lot of people looking at him with incredible skepticism as to who is this crazy guy, right? He's running a manufacturing company, that he cares about all this other stuff. But what's amazing is today, there are approximately 6,000 certified B corporations on the planet. About 900 of those happen to be in Europe. And the important thing to understand is you don't get grandfathered in. As Sharon said, you have to get re-audited every 3 years. So this is not something where you can rest on your laurels. It is something that requires a continuous commitment, which is what makes it so powerful. So that was wonderful, Sharon. And we'll come back to you about sort of some of the more recent challenges that we're seeing in the economy, and how, despite those recent challenges, your organization still remains as committed to the values as they've ever been. And I do want to point out that the way that I found out about this hidden gem, known as Cascade Engineering, was through a book that was written by a very close friend of mine and a business associate called The Purposeful Nine and Soulful Advantage, SOULFUL Advantage. And Andy Beaupre, who published the book about a year ago, was looking for hidden gems like Cascade, organizations we may not have heard about in the media. And he assembled a list of 9 companies that he reported on in great detail in this book. And they're all very inspiring, but I think Cascade has taken it to a different level. So Sharon, thank you. Now we're going to turn to Alex Friedman, and Alex has been really a pioneer in bringing ESG analytics and reporting into the private economy. Alex has written a couple of very interesting op-ed pieces in Barron's. And for our students who don't know Barron's, Barron's is the Bible of Wall Street. It's published by Dow Jones, which is the same publisher as the Wall Street Journal. And it's published on a Friday so that the asset managers are able to, enjoy their Barron's over the weekend when they've got a couple of minutes to sit back and read something that's not on a Bloomberg terminal. So Alex, you wrote 2 really interesting articles. One is Elon Musk says ESG is a scam, why he may have a point. And you also went on to write a second article, which was ESG is just a new tool to solve an old problem. So would you maybe just share, what led you to want to write these 2 op-ed pieces in Barron's? They were extraordinarily well written. But maybe we'll just start off with that, right? That here you are taking a deep dive into ESG reporting and analytics. And as important as it is, there's still a lot of work to be done. So can you share a little bit about some of the insights that you wanted to, convey from those two articles?
Sure, Mike, thanks so much for having me. First of all, it's great to see everybody, even if you're just a little square with a static picture for the most part. I have to say, I write actually a regular monthly column for Barron's, so I write a lot for them. These particular topics were important for me for a couple of reasons. First, as somebody who's building an enterprise, in our case, we're a public benefit corporation, but we're our business in the broader ESG space, I felt it was important to try to acknowledge the critics and try to unpack as objectively as I could some of the validity of their arguments. And the first op-ed that you referenced, the Does Elon Musk Kind of Have a Point article,
yeah.
This was after Tesla was kicked out of the S&P index for kind of, ESG positive type companies. And Elon Musk made a big deal about saying, how can this be? We make these great cars and, they're good for the world and they're helping move us from a carbon economy. So this must be ridiculous, this whole ESG thing. And what I was trying to point out is that first, ESG as kind of three letters is lumping together a whole lot of stuff that normally in life you don't lump together. And in fact, if you try to rank companies, of which there are so many, 50,000 public companies, 200 million private companies, those are the broadest statistics. If you try to rank companies against ESG, it's like saying who's best at life. Imagine if your college had a reunion and they said, we're going to rank everyone based on who did the best in life. You'd kind of look at them and be like, are you kidding me? Like, why would I even bother to show up at that meeting? That's right. A little bit how I think it is for ESG, because they're very different dimensions, the environmental, the social, and the governance, and then figuring out what questions you care about in each of those three dimensions outside of some cross-cutting ones that I think we could all agree matter because of, say, tragedy of the commons issues. Outside of that, you have hundreds and hundreds of different questions you could put in there, you could lump in there and sit up with a lot of subjectivity into creating the indices in the first place. So I wanted to write a piece to acknowledge that and to say, he does have a point about that broadest argument. That said, I'm not in his camp. I think you can produce a fantastic product that is good for the world, but if you treat people terribly while making that product, that's probably not good for the world. And if you injure the environment in which you operate while producing a good product, that's not good for the world either. In other words, the ends don't justify the means, or we end up back in that Milton Friedman paradigm that you started with, Mike. Yeah. Which leaves a lot of bodies scattered along the way to quote success.
Right.
And that doesn't work when those.
Yeah, Allie, I'm sorry. And to your point, I mean, we're seeing how Mr. Musk is handling his employee relations at Twitter this past week. And if anybody's been paying attention to that, it is just mind-bending that we see that level of engagement with employees in 2022, almost 2023. So could not agree more. So forgive me for interrupting, but just he's doubled down on that behavior for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other piece I wrote is I was trained initially as an investor. I ran an asset manager, for-profit, multi-billion-dollar asset manager, and I was CFO of the Gates Foundation. So I've got a real foot in kind of both worlds. And when I learned how to invest 20 plus years ago, I learned some basic analytics and diligence types of questions. And the vast majority of what I learned today might fall into the ESG category when I get outside of kind of the pure financial analysis of a company. And those are things like, hey, do you have a lot of worker loyalty? Do you have good safety records amongst your employees? Do you have problems with your data? Do you lose data? Do you have data breaches? Do you have environmental remediation issues? Like, you go down the list, and those are questions we as investors have been asking for like hundreds of years, because they're the most basic competitiveness questions. Right. They just have gotten lumped into this ESG nomenclature, which allows for kind of those who want to criticize to say, companies shouldn't be asking these questions, which is absolutely ridiculous, I can tell you, as an investor, because your job as a fiduciary of a client's money is to do your homework. And you can't do your homework if you choose to ignore all of these very salient drivers of whether a company will succeed over the long run. So this second article I wrote was just about, forget the words ESG, the letters, call it competitiveness. Do we care about the competitiveness of of our companies,
Yeah.
of our economy, of our employees, of our communities, yes, then we should be considering these factors.
All right. So, with that, I'm going to just have you know, we're going to do a deep dive, right? So we see so many ESG ratings, right? Investors Business Daily published theirs a couple of weeks ago, right? So are ESG ratings and rankings sort of the very crux of the problem, right? And let's say we had an alternate world where we had benchmarking that was only based on actual data. Would that help diffuse a lot of the criticism of this quote unquote, this ESG woke agenda that we're seeing around these indices and these rankings today?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes, I think it probably would. Let me give you an interesting statistic. If you are an investor today and you want to figure out, is a Fortune 100 company good, medium, bad when it comes to ESG? And so you go and you buy the analytics from one of the ESG providers. And let's say you take the top four, the big ones, the MSCI, S&P, groups like that. If you buy all four and you look at one company, on average, you're going to find a correlation amongst those ratings of about 50%.
Yeah.
Now, 50% correlation is useless. It's like taking a coin and flipping it. If you take the bond ratings amongst the four top bond rating groups for the same company, you'll find a correlation in like the high 90s.
Yeah.
So automatically, you have to step back and go, there must be something wrong with rankings if they don't work amongst the most sophisticated groups providing it. And the reason is, I think, linked to what I said earlier, which is there are lots of reasonable ways to construct what the questions are that should go in, and then to fill in, your view on the external data. And it's external because for the most part, it's not self-reported and audited, it's hypothesized data. So it's scraped, and as a result, it's all over the place. So when we set up Novata, it was actually because of this problem. And the we is a consortium of foundations like the Ford Foundation and the Omidyar Network, as well as lots of private equity firms that own private companies and that cared about the future of how this kind of ESG debate would look in the private markets. And they said, okay, forget the rankings thing. It hasn't worked for the public markets, and we want to do it better in the private markets. So we're going to create a neutral public benefit corp, which is what this thing is, where there's no majority owner. It's owned by the industry, the ecosystem. And we're going to build the tools that allows any company that wants to have the equivalent of like TurboTax for ESG. So a paint by numbers, handhold technology solution with people behind it to help you figure out what metrics should you care about tracking. So it's not one size fits all. There are hundreds of different metrics. Which ones matter to you? Then how do your employees easily calculate those? How can you provide some verification and validity on it? And then most importantly, how do you contextualize it? Forget rankings. Just take the actual results you just collected for your company. You don't have to tell anyone about it, but go ahead and figure out, are you top quartile or are you bottom quartile when it comes to worker safety? Or when it comes to, your scope 2 emissions? Like, those are things that most business owners want to know. And they just haven't had any ability to know it. And so that's why this thing was created. It's designed to be, a tool set, not a ranking set. And we think it'll make a big difference in empowering folks.
That's great. And on that point, so when you think about the first 1,000 customers, clients, however you refer to them, is there some theme, some way to kind of characterize what it was that led to these early adopters? That, if I was thinking about, clustering that, the world and what led to the first 1,000 to adopt, very much like, what led to Cascade to be one of the first to embrace certified B Corporation auditing. Any themes that jump out that we can, understand?
Well, to be frank, most of our clients originally are private equity firms, and they own a lot of private companies, and they care about what's happening in their portfolios. And they care for a whole bunch of good reasons. First, they want to see those companies succeed, and they understand the competitiveness piece. Second, the investors in private equity firms care. These are usually pension funds, endowments, groups like that. And they want to know that they're that the investment groups they hire are thinking about issues that their stakeholders care about. And third, and this is really critical, the regulators are inexorably moving in this direction. So you start in Europe, where under SFDR, private companies of more than a couple hundred people now have to start collecting and reporting on relevant information like this. And that is a sea change. I mean, this is like the equivalent of GAP 2.0. If you go back to the early 1930s, before GAAP, before the SEC, companies reported whatever they wanted, and there was fraud all over the place. GAAP was introduced, and it basically supercharged the capital markets because all of a sudden investors had confidence in what they were, in the data they were seeing. So what the regulators in Europe are starting to do now, and you know, our planet's getting hotter. That's just an inexorable fact right now, and it's only going in one way. Other regulators are following. What they're doing is they're saying you have to report on more than just your earnings, your balance sheet, your profit and loss, all the stuff we learned in business school. You've got to report on some basic stuff that affects all other human beings. And to us, that is going to that's going to turn thousands into millions, and probably quickly.
Interesting. And so when you have private equity clients, I'm assuming that they're bringing the Novata platform into their clients and their, you know,
to their portfolio companies, to their portfolio companies.
Portfolio companies. Absolutely. Wow. Very powerful, very viral, right? Very highly, you know, highly influential. And then my last question, Alice, is, you know, obviously we've seen a lot of controversy in the press around ESG and public markets, right? And of course, BlackRock seems to be the lightning rod, the poster child for this, getting whipsawed from both sides, right? And despite that, as you quoted with some remarkable numbers, right? The private markets are 95% of companies worldwide. So can private markets do better? And if so, how can they do better than what we're seeing in the public markets today?
Well, think about what Sharon said. And Sharon, I had the pleasure of getting to know Fred Keller over the years, you know, wonderful guy, amazing. And, you know, Fred owned a company, and he said, this is what matters to me and my family, and therefore this is what our company is going to do. And what's important about that point is that when you're a private company, for the most part, you have much fewer stakeholders than a public company. A public company's got shareholders, it's got employees, it's got analysts, it's got, you know, everyone else you can imagine, clients, communities, you name it. And often they're at odds with each other in a zero-sum game about, you know, how you allocate capital. A private company has the benefit of fewer stakeholders. In theory, if you have owners that care, like Fred and his family at Cascade, and Sharon and her colleagues, then you can decide, okay, this matters to me, it matters to my community, it matters to my state, the world. I'm going to decide to make it a priority. And that's one of the reasons we think private markets have the ability to do it better. And you know, you step back and you say to yourself, all right, capital can be a lever for good or bad, right? It one way or another, it affects a lot of things. Most of the world's events have been driven by the flows of capital or religion or government. So if capital can be good or bad, what's the artery through which it flows? It flows through private companies. 200 million of them versus 50,000 public companies. Everyone works at a private company around the world, 9 out of 10 people plus. I mean, it's amazing. And so if that's the case, what you really want to do is empower private companies to get their arms around what they're doing, what their business is doing outside of the most basic financial stuff. And that's where we think you can change the ESG story.
That's great. And I love that you, not surprised. I shouldn't be surprised that you know Fred. I'm not at all surprised that you do. I had not known that, but that's amazing, right? Love it. All right, Alice, wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, Gunnar. So for those of you who don't know the St. Gallen Symposium, it is a world-class symposium. And I will say that, you know, in Switzerland, in Europe, St. Gallen's is just a premier institution. And so we're very fortunate to have Gunnar with us. And Gunnar, of course, it's very important for people to understand that, you know, what your organization ultimately stands for is leadership with the next generation in mind. Okay. And so as we think about, you know, this discussion so far around, you know, sort of new enlightened leadership and management philosophies, right? Do you really see sort of the long-term oriented leadership style in a lot of C-suites in Europe today?
Well, Mike, thank you so much for having me and for letting me join this discussion as well. Obviously, a tough question right from the get-go. It's well, sort of given the fact that we don't have full transparency into how these decision makers actually arrive at their decisions and whether there's a sort of a proper transformation ongoing in most of the larger corporations. What we typically do is sort of look at the results, right? Because that's something we can observe. So if you sort of gauge the mood around the world, particularly in Europe right now, I would say, but you could say this for the US, for the globally as well. You have this obviously multitude of crises that we're currently sort of having to deal with. And in Europe, of course, climate is one of the ones that sort of arcs over a longer period of time. But even if you just take the last, let's say, 10 or 20 years, you have climate changes, the crisis you have, obviously the pandemic, you have now the war in Ukraine and all of the consequences, meaning energy shortage and a hike in prices, and a lot of other consequences. You have high inflation, probably a recession coming up. You have, if you go back a bit further, financial crisis, subprime crisis. So all of these crises, and the narrative that we see in Europe, particularly, is almost like a victim mentality a little bit, right? So everyone is sort of surprised that we are now having to face all of these different things at the same time. And it's what you read a lot in the press and what you gauge from these people is, we're so unfortunate. We have this big crisis, and then we have 2 or 3 others by chance simultaneously. And that's, of course, from our perspective, incorrect. They're obviously interrelated, but they also have the same origin in a sense, which is this lack of long-term thinking. And that's what we at the St. Gallen Symposium refer to sort of breaking the generational contract, because whenever you choose a short-term perspective over a long-term transformation, then you break that contract for future generations. So yeah. Arriving sort of at that analysis can only really mean one or two things. Either these businesses are trying to change, and I think they are. I'm not quite as big of a cynic yet, but they may be not doing as good of a job, or there may be not the right guidelines, not the right rankings, like Alex said, and so on. Or they're not trying at all, right? So that's sort of where you have to arrive at, because otherwise we wouldn't have all of these crises that you can certainly track back to someone making a decision that wouldn't be ESG, DEI, or CSR conform.
Right. Okay. And when you think about a company like Novata, right, are there equivalent companies in Europe that you're familiar with that are, because there's so many, obviously Europe has a lot of private companies, right, and just a very unique historical trajectory, but are there Novata-like companies trying to, provide that level of support for those who do care, who are making an effort?
I'm sure there are. I'm not as deep into the specific companies that are doing it, but I know that there's a huge transformation, as Alex said, in terms of regulation, and that also means that there's market space for companies to provide better guidance, and that's truly necessary. I know that Europe has been quoted, or let's say I can speak more for sort of the DACH regions, or Switzerland, Germany, Austria, has been quoted to do good things here. But if you do a deep dive, then oftentimes funds that are labeled as, or investments that are labeled as sustainability, really fall short of that. And I think that's, if you see sort of the market for sustainable investments, it had grown in recent years, and then in the past year, it sort of shifted down a little bit, because people are sort of calling out what's behind the curtain. There's this example that in recent, I think about a year ago, came up. Was a Deutsche Bank subsidiary, DBS, that you may have read about, sustainable energy labeled fund, and if you look behind it, it was mostly fossil fuels, right? That they're investing, which I know there's some sort of mix always, but that that leads to people, having less confidence in these labels.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, there was a whistleblower that exposed that that discrepancy. Yeah, and so I want to just point out that Gunnar and the St. Gallen Symposium have been really extraordinary partners of Decode, and so to a large extent, Gunnar and I really kind of co-created this panel. And part of it, of course, was this, this intergenerational discussion. And so, the St. Gallen Symposium is definitely one of the most diverse communities of future leaders. And we've got Allie and Carmen here to represent that group, right? And these are the leaders of tomorrow as we think about them. So, you as a man that is totally focused on this, right? And over the entire year, constantly thinking about these intergenerational issues and discussions, right? You're basically a seismograph on how this generation thinks. So how would you sort of share with us, right, what you're hearing from them as you travel, across the world in facilitating these discussions? What's their
Sure.
perspective?
Yeah, sure. And I think that's really, the way to think about it, because what we do at the St. Gallen Symposium, it's quite intuitive, right? It's we try to bring the generations together to make better decisions. And it sounds abstract, but really, if you think about any stuff that needs to get done, you need a capital and power. And for the most cases, and Carmen and Allie, you're the exception to the rule. Those are people that are of an older generation, right? So you need people with power and capital to make stuff happen, but they, as I mentioned earlier, may not have the best track record, and also sometimes may not know what is the right path to go down to. So that's what we do. We bring these generations together, and hopefully arrive at better decisions. And what we hear from that community of leaders of tomorrow is essentially two important things. So the one thing is, they want to be part of that decision-making process. And I think they can bring something to the table. And we at the Symposium work towards that with several projects. So one of the projects that we just launched, it's called Leaders on Board. So we bring young leaders on board, we bring younger people, leaders of tomorrow, like Carmen of that stature, on the boards of big corporates, to at least have someone present at the decision-making process. And we find that at least enriches it, expands the perspective in terms of timing. So that's one thing. And the second thing we hear is, and that's also quite intuitive. So we sort of feel I don't want to seem too preachy, right? But it's quite intuitive. The next generation that's your employees and your consumers. And consumers nowadays, they want to know where the stuff is from and how it's getting done and how it's made. And they want to know, if you're a company that has global supply chains, they want to know that ideally you're not breaking any laws along that supply chain and all that stuff. They want to know that, and that's fair, I think. So that's your consumers of the future. So if you want to sustain as a business, yes, you can slap a CSR label on something, but if it's not tech-based, if there's nothing behind it, then you're going to fall short. And the same goes for employees. For my generation, and maybe Mike and Alex and Sharon, a job was in most cases a job. And you had your passion projects and what you do maybe, beyond that. You did that on the weekends after work. Nowadays, that has shifted. People are looking for jobs that actually match up with what they stand for, what their purpose is, and they want institutions that have the same ideals, values as them. So if you want, in the demographic shifts that we're in, where you get less and less young people, if you want the good people, then you have to be honest and open about these things, and that's the only way to get them. So that's what we hear from the community. If you want to get them, if you want to get a Carmen to join your company, and I'm sure she'll speak on this in a second, you better be genuine about these issues.
That's great. And obviously Carmen and Allie are now founder entrepreneurs, right? And so, to sort of just very quickly comment, right? So as someone who's been a professor of entrepreneurship at a number of institutions over 20 years, what I have seen personally in my classrooms is, 20 years ago when young students were creating new ventures, they were almost entirely focused on sort of the classic, high tech, high growth, high return, for profit. Right. Today, I think, no exaggeration, 80 to 85% of my students, without any prompting from me, are creating new ventures in the classroom, many with an intent to bring into the markets, with some focus on social impact. It's such an incredibly natural thing for them, right? And I see the most socially and environmentally conscious generation since the 1960s. And it's very inspiring, right? And the passion behind it and the conviction behind it is remarkable. So thank you, Gunnar. So let me now turn to our future leaders, and let me turn to both Allie and Carmen. And I love that Carmen is in Europe and Allie is on the West Coast, but these are two young women who both have decided to, put their talent and their energy and their passion into fashion tech. And we think about what's happening in the world of fashion, and I just read an article where Shine, the Chinese fast fashion company, in just 10 years is doing about $25 billion a year in turnover. And so very quickly being the equivalent of the Zaras of the world and a lot of these other companies that we know, the H&Ms of the world, right? And so there's a massive problem. And there was a very interesting article in the New York Times a couple of days ago, something equivalent, that over the course of the 3 years of the pandemic, we have consumed massive amounts of what they're calling fast furniture, okay? The IKEA and the Wayfairs of the world, right? And we're seeing 12 million tons of fast furniture being dumped into landfills. So this is a problem that, just throw another level of, waste onto the pile. So I'm going to let Allie and Carmen decide who wants to go first, but, both of you have worked in large organizations, and at about the same time, you decided that you would move into the very challenging world of being founders of tech companies. So kind of building on what we heard from Gunnar, what was it that led you to make this big leap to, take on the unique challenges of starting a new company?
I can jump in if that's okay,
Yeah,
Carmen.
yeah, please.
Perfect. Go for it.
So it's an honor to be on a panel with another female tech founder. Not very often that this happens, as you all know. Yeah, so I'm really excited about that. So we'll talk after this, but so I guess where to start. So prior to this whole world, first, let me just start by saying all of the terms that we've used today give me hives, like completely. I came from an innovation and growth strategy consulting background as a business designer for Accenture Interactive, now called Accenture Song globally, for the last 4+ years. So I developed products and services utilizing emerging tech for Fortune 500 C-suites across every major industry and business sector. And quite frankly, I got really tired of getting put on projects that sound great in theory, multi-million-dollar projects, sometimes $10, $15 million plus, that Fortune 500 C-suites were spending to bring in our team to create all of these new products that cared about people and the planet, and then would get put on a shelf after they showed investors that they did their due diligence, they checked the box, and that's it. And so actually ETTA stands for Earthlings Taking to Action, because I got so tired of my work not getting brought into action, even though there was massive opportunity from the profits perspective, first and foremost, as well as for people and the planet. That actually my last client, I was on one of the biggest fashion brands in the world. And I learned a ton about the industry that showed me right away I saved all my vacation time for 4 years. And I said, once I have an idea that kind of sits with me in the right way, I think I'm going to go do this. And so I learned about the fact that the fashion industry is in the top 3 largest polluting industries in the world, more than all land and sea travel combined. So we talked about Elon Musk and electric cars a little while ago, and Esther and I talked about yesterday at Berkeley, this idea that we talk about how electric cars are going to save the planet, when in reality, the impact of that is a drop in the bucket compared to if we just shopped a little bit smarter. And there's not a lot being done in this space. At Accenture, we like to say that the fashion industry was one of the last data dinosaurs, so largely untapped by the data world. And so at that client that I was on at the time, we noticed a massive shift, obviously during the pandemic, that hasn't dropped off, in 142% more e-commerce purchases over the last 3 years. But when you buy online, you return upwards of 40% more product. So now, over the last 3 years, this has wreaked havoc on the operating expenses of brands and retailers around the world. So shipping and returns today equates to between 40 to 75% of any given brand's operating expenses. And so when you think about that, this isn't just an environmental problem, which has snowballed with all of these back and forth returns. Shopping for a white t-shirt and seeing how many back and forth shippings there were was kind of the light bulb in my head as a user or a consumer of like, okay, there's a huge problem here. And then seeing what that looked like on the back end of business, help merging those two ideas together, taking what I learned from all these other industries and then adding those emerging tech pieces to say, what if we knew our size before we buy so that we're not having to return all of this inventory? And then what is the power of, at ETTA, at least we're creating the world's largest repository of human body shape data in the process. So not only do we curate the internet content into your own personalized shopping portal designed for your exact body, so you know what's going to fit you before you buy. But also then we can say with all of this data, or we can, similar to what Alex was talking about, create benchmarks for the industry to say, okay, here are the types of bodies, all the different kinds of bodies out here, how the fat distribution evolves over time, how shape changes over time. So not only can you, or so that you can better understand how to design and merchandise and manufacture size to people's actual bodies, because this industry largely hasn't been disrupted in how we size garments since the late 1800s. And so if we're ever better able to do that, we can decrease. So today, 80% of clothing that's produced goes straight to landfill. So you're seeing that get dropped off in third world or in developing nations all around the world. You're seeing it even happen here in the US. Madewell had during the pandemic, at the very beginning, they were seeing so many returns. They had to buy massive fields in North Carolina to dump all of this inventory into because they had nowhere to put it. And so seeing all of these issues kind of culminating in tandem has created this perfect storm for opportunity for people on the planet. Carmen, I dropped a lot of stats that I'm sure you're right in line with, so I'll let you take it from there.
Oh, totally. I'm very happy that you dropped all those stats. I mean, I can jump in from here, especially. Sorry?
Yeah, please do.
Because I loved actually your one of your last sentences, that it's a storm of opportunities, right? So it's definitely a storm, and it's getting worse and worse when people are shopping more. And I definitely see there's so much happening in this world, and there's more awareness also rising in terms of conscious consumerism. And I just think that one of the biggest problem here is that every company nowadays is saying they're green, and the greenwashing also with Shine is just a tremendous problem that we have to solve as well. And this is also what initially brought me to like just being at a founder of a fashion tech company that drives circularity. So when I was working for Harper's Bazaar as a journalist, I was constantly writing about new trends that are coming up and what people should then buy into. And of course, I could also tap into articles that touched more how companies like do better. Like back then, it was not that big of a topic, and like these conscious lines were just coming up. It was like 3 years ago, so not too far away. But we see how this just evolvement came up within the last couple of years. And I was just constantly telling what people have to buy. And then I was looking into my own wardrobe, reflecting those buying behaviors. And looking also in those stats, I did more research. I wrote my bachelor's thesis and another research paper about Gen Z consumption, and then especially about the sharing economy and how sharing economy models, I mean, you name it, from the car industry with car sharing, from Airbnb, just how people, especially our generation, isn't too much about ownership anymore and more about the experience and about having this experience of fast, experiencing something and more kind of the need. So a car, you need to go somewhere, but an Airbnb you rent out because it's maybe nicer, it's because of the experience. So there are so many clothes around in this world, like 100 billion clothes are produced every year. And like people are shopping 50% more than 10 years ago, but wearing those clothes just 40% less. So they don't even wear 1 out in 7 pieces of the clothes they actually wear. And what I then saw, especially when those sustainable solutions came up and H&M and all those retailers were telling, we're green now, that people, of course, actually also wanted to shop more consciously. And there was a very interesting study that also moved me to close friends in the end. That was from an Ellen MacArthur, and there was also something tapping in the same direction from Zalando, actually, which is touching in this attitude behavior gap. So that actually says that consumers, and especially Generation Z and millennials, want to shop more sustainably, but if they have the 2 solutions, they still choose the cheaper one. So The problem to really shop sustainably in a fashion industry is because people either think it's too complicated, it's not accessible, or if they find something that is sustainable by someone who says it, or they think it's more sustainable, it's just too expensive. So there is this huge gap of people who want to shop more sustainably but cannot afford it or cannot access it. And this just drove me crazy. And that's when I decided to launch Close Friends that just digitalizes the wardrobes of people, because we all have clothes in our wardrobes, and why not connect these clothes with each other, and you can just share it with each other. So it started as a peer-to-peer solution where just people were interacting together just within Germany. And then we saw more brands approaching us actually who wanted to participate in this whole sharing economy framework that we created with Close Friends. And that's when I actually realized the whole framework that could be created in the sharing economy for fashion, that when brands start to like reuse or to reshare their clothes, there is also a huge potential that they can unlock to drive customer retention, to actually have more touch points with several consumers, which is one garment. So this also means you would, after all, produce less. So there is just a huge potential that you can unlock that is within the circular economy that we're currently tapping more into by working more closely together with brands and creating a data-based software that teaches them for how to integrate circular actions within their business strategies. And yeah, it's just, there is so much to do still, and I'm so happy that you were touching more on the sizing, which is a huge topic as well, but also shows how we as consumers and as like casting a vote every day of what we wear have such a huge impact. And it's not only the retailers, it's not only the regulators who have to make a shift, but it's also all of us sitting here who can decide to make a change. And I think this is so important to always realize.
That's great. Thank you, Carmen. And let me build on the notion of the circular economy. And Allie, let me go back to you for a second, right? So we see companies in the United States like the Real Real or Poshmark, and we've seen, brands like Lululemon who are now buying back their clothes, but for very, very small amounts of money. And they've gotten a lot of attention, and you're hearing so much more about Gen Z, wanting to purchase these, previously used clothes. But from what I've seen, the Real Real only focuses on very sort of exclusive fashion brands, which is a very, very small part of, the economy. And obviously no one is reselling Zara or H&M or Shine. It's the stuff that's just meant to be disposed of. So is the press just paying a lot of attention to this, but it's really just an extremely small part of what we're seeing in the fashion market today when we look at some of these resale sites like the Real Real?
So quite honestly, I think that the correlation that I've seen across every industry is the higher the price point, or the higher the price point of the good or the service that you're providing, the more capital there is to invest into research and development of new products and services, number one, and number two, customer experience. And so I think that so far we've seen, and that's a very historical trend, right? Of you might see these flavors of sustainability get added into a business model where there is that extra capital, but as use of proof of concept to be able to trickle down further into the mass markets. And so I know that just in terms of specifically the brands that we're looking to work with right now, realistically, and for many businesses in this industry, that there's a much larger profit opportunity to exist as a business to be able to serve the mass market if you start at the top and move your way down. Also, especially in fashion, I feel that a lot of the most innovative trends, because of that extra capital, as we talked about, start at the top. But then too, this idea of a lot of brands care so much about keeping that brand stature, right, in the market. And so they're not going to be the ones that then continue to bring the trend across the market. They hope to be the trendsetter that others follow.
Right.
Am I answering your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I guess at the end of the day, is it fair to say that it's still such an infinitesimal part of, right? I think, Carmen, what did you say? How many billions of SKUs or individual units of clothes are produced in a given year? Some insane number, right?
100 billion clothes
Yeah, right.
are produced, or they're just assets and accessories, clothes are produced. So it's,
yeah, I would imagine when we go to the Real or Poshmark, it's a infinitesimal fraction of that that's actually being resold today, would be my guess.
So what's interesting is that all of these solutions that we're talking about, to me, are the tip of the iceberg. This is one of the last industries that really has not been disrupted by technology, largely, or data. And so when we think about low-hanging fruit or easy ways to start, we have to look at what money is getting invested into this industry. And quite frankly, I feel that this is one of those spaces that VCs have been a little nervous to dip their toes into yet. And I hear that a lot. We've seen this tiny opportunity in the market with this tech that hasn't really had a very clear business use case. We've seen this really interesting fabric that hasn't had a lot of traction in the market yet. We're in that test and learn phase. And I think we're starting to move beyond, or a lot of major brands right now are doing the whole greenwashing. Let's throw spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks, without looking at what are the business implications of this and how can we marry the two together to have it make a lot of sense in the future. Yeah. And so to your point, I think the Real, Poshmark, all of these have been models that are easily understood by investors out there from other industries that we're able to move into this space, and that we're entering kind of a new phase, a second wave of technological disruption to this space that we're just in the beginnings of what it's going to expand into. Yeah.
Thank you. So let me very quickly just go on to one last topic before we open it up for questions. And if there are questions, please start putting them into the chat. We've got a unique opportunity to engage with 5 world-class experts. But I want to go back to Alex for a second. Alex, obviously in the wake of the George Floyd and the Breonna Taylor tragedies, right, we saw just a massive global reaction and a massive number of companies making commitments to doing better on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And a lot of organizations investing billions of dollars into more inclusive opportunities. So as you think about the Novata platform, and as you said, right, it's very customized, that every organization can kind of determine, where it wants to focus the metrics that are most important. Can you talk about within the platform, the diversity, equity and inclusion component of that? Is that an important part of what your clients are looking at right now, and if so, how?
Yeah, super important. If you go and talk to state pension funds, if you go to Florida, they don't want to talk about the E and the ESG, but they do want to talk about the S in the DEI piece. If you go to other states, they'll focus on the E. So it just depends kind of where you're coming from. Yeah. In our case, the way we've chosen to tackle it is kind of got a few components. First, we worked with ILPA, which is the Association of Limited Partners. These are the investors into private equity, and they wield a tremendous amount of influence because they're the trillions of dollars of pension funds and sovereign wealth funds that steers one way or another. They developed a set of DEI questions that they care about, and we integrated into our platform so that a company can choose to report on them if they want. We also pulled all the DEI related questions from every other framework organization, from SASB and others. And then we try to add another dimension, which is we crowdsource metrics. So since we have thousands of companies using this, often they'll add custom metrics. So if a company adds a custom DEI angle, we'll record it anonymously. And then if you have a firm like Cascade and they come on and they say, well, what are other companies in our industry doing on the DEI side? We can almost stack rank what their peers are doing. So we can say, look, 8 of these following 10 questions are used by every one of your peers. It gives some insight into, okay, maybe these are ones we should make sure we have a handle on. So that's how we tackle it.
That's great. And just, obviously we've seen a lot of commitments made, and then the pandemic happened and inflation happened, and, a lot of economic shocks had happened. Do you have any sense as to whether we're stalled on the improvement of some of our DEI goals and initiatives? Have we backtracked at all? I've seen in the world of venture capital, for example, and I'm going to moderate a panel this afternoon with a number of managing directors of venture capital firms from underrepresented groups, including LGBTQ and Black-led and Latina-led. But I've seen, even within the world of venture capital, we've kind of backtracked to where we were before the pandemic. And I'm wondering if you're seeing the same thing in general, from the optics that you have access to.
Maybe 2 points. One, to be undiplomatic for a second, venture capital is really been lame on this stuff. They've been the segment of the investment world that's basically said, oh, it doesn't apply to us because we don't control the companies. We're just an investor in, we can't tell them what to do.
Yeah.
We've been shocked that, credit, private equity, growth, they're all starting to tackle this stuff, but VC for the most part has said maybe some point in the future.
I got it. Fascinating.
I guess
Thank you. No need to be diplomatic, my friend. No need to be diplomatic, right? We got to call it as we see it here, but thank you. Yes.
And then we've started to get enough statistical relevance in terms of data points using our platform that we can get our arms around some kind of stunning conclusions. And one that we've really been shocked by has been in private companies that are owned by kind of alternative managers, meaning private equity, venture thing.
Yeah.
There are almost no women board members. I mean, like almost zero.
Wow. Yeah.
Out of thousands and thousands of companies, which is just shocking. We couldn't believe it. We looked through the data numerous times to make sure we hadn't made a mistake.
Yeah, and 50% of all women now, fill the seats of the most prestigious business schools, right?
Exactly, in the public side, right? So there's a massive lag on the private side when it comes to this issue.
Fascinating. What a sad commentary. Well, listen, we've got a question from our audience, and it's directed direct to you, Alex, which is, what is keeping investors from diving into the clothing reformation track? Robert, why don't you, I'm not sure if that's clear. Robert, please, can you turn on your audio and maybe ask that question with a little bit more detail? Alex, do you understand the question? All right, is that Alex now?
No, I don't understand.
Yeah, we got you, Robert.
Can you hear me?
Perfectly, Robert.
So Carmen and Allie, I happen to be Allie's dad. That's my asterisk.
Oh, there you go. Okay, Allie's dad, welcome to the panel.
And I'm not an investor, but I'm an admirer of both Carmen and Allie. I just met Carmen.
Yeah.
So here's the question. They just pointed out that you can make every single car in the world electric and every light bulb electric and use windmills, but the clothing industry is burning the environment.
Mm-hmm. And
watching young people try to reform the venture capitalists into understanding how important this food chain is, right? It's almost like saying, well, we really don't want to get rid of the toll takers at the bridge anymore and stop traffic because they have a union. But now there's no more toll takers and we drive better. And I get a thing on my email that I owe a ticket stub. So Alex, you were talking about people that really want to know what's behind the scenes, and these two young ladies have done an incredible job of making the case for transforming how you size, how you make, how you share, and how you distribute clothing. Why aren't these putting major monies into this and just greenwashing? And Alex, that's your specialty to understand investing. That's why I asked you. Thank you.
I think my sister actually would be a better one to opine on this. She's the fashion critic at the New York Times, and her name is Vanessa, and she does a lot of work on the broader industry and some of these issues. I'll ask her. I don't know, Michael, what do you think?
I really don't know if I fully understand the question, to be honest with you. I'm not sure if I fully understand the question. So Robert, I'm sorry, but I'm not sure if you're going to get a great answer right now from us. Okay.
So what part of the question is not understandable? The part that there's greenwashing, but there's no true major investors willing to jump into what it is you're talking about. Environment, the 3 Ps, right? So if you're going to talk about the planet, they're not doing it. If you're talking about people, well, I don't think they're doing it. If you're talking about profit, I think that's the only thing they're looking at.
Yeah. So if I understand correctly, what you're asking is what, you know, and I think as Allie mentioned, right? And Alex has mentioned, right? Some industries move at different paces than others, right? Some industries are more enlightened than others, but for whatever reason, the fashion industry is locked in, you know, antiquated practices, right? And yes, there are organizations like LVMH, and Stella McCartney is a very well-known sort of, you know, very committed environmental activist. But for whatever reason, this industry just has not bought into what we're talking about. Now, there's one exception I know, which is the women's yoga apparel company known as Athleta, right? Athleta is a company that is in fact a certified B Corporation. There may be others. I'm just not an expert in the fashion industry. Allie or Carmen may know, right? But, you know, I look at what's happened in the world of innovation, and I look at how far behind the auto industry has been until recently, how far behind the healthcare industry has been, and how much lip service we're hearing from the oil and gas industry about what they're focusing on, right? And I just think that not all industries are committed in the same way, right? And so, you know, at the end of the day, investors only have so much control, right? You need committed entrepreneurs and business builders that are looking to create different forms of business in every industry. And if they're not, then it doesn't matter if all the capital in the world is available today. Does that address your question in some way?
It's a great start. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, guys, we got 5 more minutes. I'd love to, you know, field a few more questions if we can before we wind up here. Yes. Oh, please, Gunnar, go for it.
Maybe a question to Sharon, because I just love the story that you told at the very beginning, and we always inclined to believe that all of our customers would react positively to all of that change and transformation, and for many companies it's probably also associated with perhaps even a change in pricing or processes. So maybe some stories from your end. Did you ever get any negative feedback from your customer base or anyone in your ecosystem that said, you know, I don't care about all that stuff, just deliver on time? Or just curious.
And you're asking me specifically? You asking me, or who are you asking? You're asking on the panel?
Sharon.
Oh, Sharon, okay. Please, Sharon. Oh, Sharon, yeah, great.
You're right. There's both camps, and fortunately, the majority of our customers are being driven to include more ESG, and they're driving their supply base. And so when they drive that down to us, then we drive it further down into our supply base, into the 3rd tier. So, you know, they're incorporating their own platforms, whether it's SAQ, M2030, you know, there's a ton of them out there. They are requiring us now to have goals and to report out on sustainability and diversity, and try to help them meet their goals. And so we're seeing that quite often, but it's really coming from a lot of the automotive side and from our furniture side, but there's other areas that are not inclusive at all. So I think they're going to get more pressure because that's just the direction everybody's going in. Now, is everybody happy about that? Not really. There are some organizations who think, oh, it's going to cost me more money. I've got to apply more resources. This is going to take time. And in when they're not complying, they're going to be scored less on their scorecards, perhaps not be able to bid on new jobs or be involved in that process. So it will eventually hurt them in the long run if they don't comply. And so they're going to have to go to other markets to get, sales. So I think it's going to continue to expand, and I think it's going to be driven by the large corporations as far as the supply base. But in the private industry, we try to find our own niche, and we try to have sustainability be good for business and the bottom line as well. So it's what you make of it.
That's great. All right, I've got 2 questions here, and I think that'll take us to the end of our time limit. So let me start off with the one from Maisha first, because I think it's more specific. And I think Alma, great to hear from you, Alma, and we'll go with yours last because I think it's a wonderful way to sort of end this discussion. But this is being addressed to both Carmen and Allie. What do you believe are the biggest challenges that both of you might face in taking fashion deeper into the world of technology?
Carmen, I'll let you kick this one off.
Okay, yeah, I also have to think about it because it's a great question, actually. I guess it's also something that has to do with what Robert was touching on, that we need more awareness, that we need to bring tech and fashion experts together to drive solutions, which is time intensive, which is then also capital intensive. So I guess one of the challenges is that there is not enough awareness yet, and not enough capital yet to outperform those challenges, but also that it is kind of a new field that we're touching on. So fashion tech hasn't been around for too long. So I guess we just also need, whether it's from universities that are taking up this topic, or from just different stakeholders raising awareness, this will help us to bring more people with talent and knowledge into this field. And I also guess, the more people who are working on this and the more expertise we're bringing in from different industries will help us to really outperform solutions faster and more efficiently. And this is, I guess, something, it just needs time, people and talent, and the willingness for collaboration, also with the companies who are already, the bigger corporates in the market. So the openness from them to also take risks, maybe, and to take risks for collaboration, which may be the better solutions in the long term. What do you think, Allie?
I think everything you said is super sound. I also think there's 3 kind of key areas or challenges that we're excited to tackle and that we're in the thick of. So the first is data transparency. So interestingly enough, the fashion industry has no common data language. And that is one of the big things that we're after solving at ETTA specifically. But one of the best examples I can give of that is if any of you have seen True Size is an example of a solution in market today, a sizing solution. So you can go on and say, okay, I'm this size in Nike, what size am I in Adidas? Well, does that really matter? Because they're working with hundreds of manufacturers all over the world, sometimes for the same SKU or product. So it's like saying apples to oranges. There's no true decision or key in a piece of data to help you make an informed decision that's actually going to have impact on your end experience as a user getting the item that you want. The second piece is that the fashion industry is facing a massive tech gap. So quite frankly, the pay in those industries is not what it is of Silicon Valley or of traditional tech companies. And it's really hard to recruit tech talent that has the skill sets necessary to be able to bring to market any of these ideas that many of these fashion companies are coming up with, which is and then also too, many of these organizations have been structured with a gap between the business group and the tech group, and they don't talk a lot of the time. And so you see fallout. An example of that would be if you saw last year, Nike came out with their Coachella line a week after Coachella, and you're like, what? why are they marketing this to me? I was just there last week, but because the two teams didn't talk, things like that drop off all the time. And that's a small example. And so the talent piece is the other kind of really big thing. I could talk about this for 500 hours, so I'll stop there, but happy to chat offline with anyone too.
Okay, all right, and listen, we're going to take one last question, and Alma Chen. Alma is a recent Berkeley grad. She's currently at Harvard, mentee of mine, very focused on social entrepreneurship. And so she's asking obviously a big question on what are the trends that the panelists see happening around ESG and CSR in the next 10 years. And I'm going to ask both Gunnar, if you would represent Europe, and Alex, if you would represent the US. And I think we'll wrap on that. Okay, so Gunnar, why don't you, if you would, sort of lead us off here?
Sure, happy to do that. Obviously, very, very big question. I think the change will come whether the companies want it or not, and that will be, and sometimes it's very simple things. If you take one of the issues out of that whole big chunk, which is then, let's say, sustainability and finding solutions to climate change. In Europe, all of the big insurance players are or have been coordinating, collaborating, building alliances to essentially not insure companies anymore that don't fulfill certain requirements, right? So it will be a combination out of regulation, but also just market capitalism. Markets will solve the issues in some of these instances. And if you as a company don't adhere to certain standards, you will just not get insurance anymore, you won't get the funding anymore. And that will, I think, be the reality for the coming years. I'm hopeful that will be the case, right? So that's sort of my, I think you can't hide from this, not because of standards, but it's just happening. Yeah.
You can run, but you can't hide. I get it. Okay, I love it. All right, Alex, would you kindly have the last word as we wind this panel down?
I guess I think that, I have young kids. I think when they're in the workforce, they will be, they won't even understand the idea that a company only had to report on financial results. They'll kind of scratch their head. I think the same way that I can't really understand a world where companies could report however they wanted, pre-IFRS and all that stuff. The near-term things, I think companies will actually have to, we move from trust me to show me. They'll actually have to collect the data and make it available to their stakeholders.
Right. Yeah, that's great. So whether it would be the Omitar network that did this in the world of philanthropy, right? Or of course now, as we move into the certified B Corporation, or the ESG reporting that you enable, absolutely, we are in the world of prove it to me. The level of greenwashing, whitewashing, blue washing, whatever has just the performative stuff. It's just been endless. All right, well, listen, I cannot thank this extraordinary group of panelists enough for giving up an important part of their Sundays to talk about such an incredibly relevant issue. And hopefully we have informed and educated our Stanford and Berkeley students. Alice Friedman, Sharon Darby, Dr. Gunnar Hauptmann, Carmen Jenny, Allie Berger, thank you all so much for your insights and your passion and your commitment to this incredibly important topic. And for all of you, we will be seeing you a little bit later this afternoon as we begin the physical component of this conference. And I look forward to engaging in a panel discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the world of venture capital. And maybe hopefully I'll bring some positive insights back to Alex that will make him smile. Okay. All right. Thank you all so much, and thank everyone for your questions from the audience. We really appreciate your engaging with us today. Take care, everyone.
Thanks so much.
All right.